listening to Consulting Logistics, presented by Aborn and Company. I'm your host, Tim Dooner. Thank you for listening in. Joining me today is Russ Aborn, founder and CEO of Aborn and Company. This marks his 50th year in the industry, and to celebrate that, we're going to talk about his experiences in the business, Aborn and Company's origin story, his perspective on starting a company, and how he's adapted to changing market conditions throughout the years. Russ, thank you for stepping into the studio today, and congratulations on the big 5-0. 50 years, that's quite an accomplishment.
Well, it makes me sound real old when you say it that way. Thank you, Tim. It's nice to be here.
Just to set the table, and I can't think of a better person to ask this question, but for the curious, the unfamiliar, or those who simply want to know more, what is Aborn and Company?
In the old days, we were what was called a traffic management company, and then a logistics consultant. And today we're a supply chain consultant, essentially, with a particular expertise in freight pricing and operations. And that largely grew out of my experience in operations as a driver and as a manager, terminal manager, a consultant for another company. A lot of different experiences I've had have paid off for our clients over the years.
Your history kind of informs the fabric and the DNA of the company. So let's take a step back to the beginning of this long and winding road, this 50-year career. And I don't think it's all that you're seasoned. You're a seasoned veteran.
Good.
And you got the scars to prove it.
Yeah.
Let's take a step back. You're an alumnus of Archbishop Williams High School in Braintree, Mass., right? Go Bishops. At that time, was trucking supply chain, was that even on your periphery? Were you sitting in geometry thinking about this?
Actually, yes, I was, but it was in a different form. Archbishop Williams overlooks Route 3 South, and whenever I had the window on that side, I'd look out the window and wish I was out driving something somewhere rather than listening to nuns talk about algebra or history. Yeah, I would look out the window and wish I was somewhere else.
You had your secret life of Walter Mitty moment looking at trucks.
That's when I did think about it. And there were other times. I remember distinctly we held a players' practice without coaches one time up at the Blue Hills and looking out at 128 and seeing the trucks go by and wondering where they were going.
So you don't have, your background, your family wasn't mired in the trucking or transportation or even logistics industry. This is just a daydream come true.
No, my father drove a truck.
Oh, okay, so there was some blood.
Yeah, and I had ancestors way far back who were ship captains. So, I guess it's in the blood. We've been moving freight since, I guess, about 1720.
Wow, that's you've gone pretty far back there.
Yeah.
So after that, so you're in high school, you're thinking about what you want to do next with your life.
So when I was in Archbishop Williams, during summers off, the minimum wage at the time was $1.25 an hour. And I knew from my father that the Teamsters were paying $3.41 an hour. And, you pretty much guaranteed 2 hours overtime. I could make almost as much money in one day as I could have made for the week somewhere else. So I went down to Wood Road in Braintree, which is where I could get to easily. Applied for a job, and they hired me, and I was what you call a spare, which is they would call me when there was work available. Somebody booked off sick, somebody was on vacation, etc. I would come in and unload and reload the trucks. And it was a great experience, and I knew that if I didn't work hard, they wouldn't call me back. So I had to work real hard so that I could be a busy spare. And over the years, when I turned 21, I got my commercial license. It was called a Class 1 at the time. And I got the license and I drove. And I peddled freight in the city of Boston. All around the area, actually. And drove over the road for APA transport. And I, was going to Northeastern, and I sometimes took a semester off to work because it was great money and kind of spoiled me so that when I graduated and looked around at all the jobs, the only thing that paid well was a supervisor position, management in trucking. And so I went to St. Johnsbury Trucking and ended up there for a good number of years. I started as an outbound supervisor, and at various times I've been a dispatcher, operations manager, terminal manager, until I got into this business. In 1980, the Motor Carrier Act was passed, and it began the deregulation of the trucking business. Up until that time, the business was regulated by the Interstate Commerce Commission. Rate increases were granted each year by the ICC, and if a carrier did really well, they operated profitably, they didn't get much of a rate increase. But if they operated badly, they would get a big rate increase. So it was a disincentive for the carrier to manage their business competitively back in the regulation days. After that, the industry got more competitive in terms of service and price. I think the first discount that came around in like 1982 was a 5% from Yellow Freight, and it caused an uproar. And at that point, everyone was using their own base rate. They did adapt to that pretty quickly. Yellow had a 5% discount, and I was with St. Johnsbury. And along the way, was walking by looking at the carts of freight that were still on the dock after the trucks had left. And I pulled a freight bill out of a pocket of a cart, and it was for Grossman's, which was a big company around here, headquartered in Braintree. And there was no discount on the freight bill. These were, of course, St. Johnsbury shipments. There was no discount on the freight bill for Grossman's. And then next to it was a shipment for a much, much smaller company, Somerville Lumber. And they had a 5% discount on their freight bill from St. Johnsbury. And I wondered, why couldn't a bigger company get a better price? You know, maybe there's a business here. I started thinking about it for a while, and then I happened into meet at one of our customers who said he was a freight consultant. And I said, well, if you ever need a smart guy, I'd like to talk to you about it. I met him at Logan Airport. He was on his way somewhere. And I met him and we talked, and he said, I'd love to hire you. You know, you really know the business. You have a great reputation around the business. I'd love to hire you, but I don't have any money. I said, well, I can solve that. I'll work for free. And so I did. I said to my wife, I said, this is a good opportunity to learn a different end of the business. And I can work a few hours a day, and then I can go and drive a truck for APA in the evening and run down to North Bergen and back. And she said, do you think it's a good move? I said, yeah, I do. She said, well, if you think it'll work, it probably will. So
You never look before you leave. Like St. Johnsbury, I was just thinking about that, how you're just a supervisor right out of college.
Well, I knew a lot about how the work should go because of my experience at APA.
Yeah.
And it was easy to see if somebody was working hard or they weren't. You had to manage them properly, and you had to keep an eye on certain people who seemed to think their life's mission was to get as little work done as possible while getting paid. For the most part, the guys were good, and they were good workers. And I guess I was in my mid-20s by then, and a lot of the guys were 45, 50. But they were pretty good. They were used to young guys coming in to boss them about and tell them what to do. And but some of them were real good, real helpful to me. And then I went into dispatch, and you know, we used to put, I think, about 70, 75 drivers on the street every day, delivering small shipments and full trail load shipments. We used to put out 2,500 deliveries a day, make 500 pickups. It was pretty busy. I had a phone on my right, a phone on my left, and a radio mic in front of me that would go to the South Shore or the North Shore, depending on who I was trying to get. So it was always busy. You have the phone in one hand, shouting in the microphone in the other. And, you know, a customer would call and say, where's my truck? And, you know, you get on the radio, try to raise the driver, and eventually developed a shtick where I'd say, he stopped to rescue orphans from a burning building. That's why he's not there.
It's developing the stand-up routine on the
fly. Yeah, but people usually reacted pretty well to it.
So you had this experience, though, and you set this great foundation working in trucking. You learned how dispatching went. In the back of your head, you had this idea looking at the freight bills. Why are some people getting discounts and other people aren't? And now you're working at a job where you're not getting paid. Yeah. Do you remember the exact moment because you were young when you started your first company. Do you remember what the impetus was? What were you like, you know what? Forget all this. I'm doing it myself.
Well, the company I went to work for was a freight broker. who billed himself as a consultant and said to me, we're going to do a good job for these customers and the carriers are going to pay us. And I think it's all started with great intention. But eventually, what happened was company began to pay more attention to their money than the customer's money. And I was the one that had to go out and say to the customer, we're working hard for you. And what happened one day was one of the clients that we had, the boss of the company said to me, we're going to have to take a $3 increase on the minimum charge for Laureate's books. And I said, why? He said, because in order for it to be profitable, we need to get 18 more cents out of each minimum shipment because it costs to handle the shipments and blah, blah. So I said, so our client is going to spend $3 more on a shipment so we can get 18 cents? I said, how does that make? I said, I'm going to go out and tell this guy we're working for him. We're doing this. We're charging him $3 so we can get 18 cents. It's just crazy.
Yeah, it's a hell of a margin.
Yeah. That company got 6% of the freight revenue from the carrier. And at that time, I began to see that the better job we did negotiating rates for the clients, the less money we made. Almost un-American. So if we got somebody a 50% discount on a $1,000 freight bill, they'd pay $500, and we would get, 6% of $500, which is $30. If we got a 40% discount, which was not as good as 50, we would get 6% of $600. Yeah. So it almost un-American, and I said, well, this is not good. We started out with great intention, and eventually it deteriorated where all we were worried about was ourselves. So I went to the two top people in the company. I said, I've got a better idea. I said, let's not be a broker. Let's just charge the clients a fee, and we'll negotiate their rates, and we don't have to worry about commissions or anything else. It's a straight-ahead business. And they said, that's a stupid idea. We don't want to do it. And so I said, well, I'm not going to go out every day and tell clients this. So I said, something's got to give here. And eventually I said, well, I'm going to leave. And I gave my notice, and they tried to talk me out of it. But I went up to Bank of Boston, which had a freight payment division at the time. And I went up to Woburn, and I met them up there, and they said, yeah, we'll give you a job selling. We'll assign you customers in the Midwest, like Chrysler and all these other things. And, it was kind of heady to think that I'd be calling on the big automakers. But they didn't have a great system. I used to, when I was in sales for that company, I would clean Bank of Boston's clock regularly because they were lousy at the job. And I didn't, I said, why should I do that? So then I went down to Norwood and met with the people at Barry and Lloyd, and they were very big at the time. They were handling General Electric, and they offered me a job. I went home and I said to my wife, I said, I could do this, and I could hire Barry and Lloyd to do my clients' bills, and I could negotiate the pricing for the client. Because by that time, I had been getting a regular week's salary with the other company. So I said to my wife, I said, I could negotiate freight rates all day long and get a good rates because I know what the carriers are interested in. I know what freight appeals to which carrier, what's in their wheelhouse, so I can get a better price than most people can. And I can have someone else do the freight bill audit, which is a necessary function, was at the time, and get someone to do the freight payment. I wouldn't have to handle any money, which really pleased me greatly. So she said, well, if you want to do it, give it a try. And she's always been very supportive. And
they always say there's a great woman behind every good man, right?
But she's a great woman. I'm not sure about me, but she has been always very supportive of me, whatever I wanted to do. And it's worked out well.
So you have this very American idea. You're looking at a process and you're like, there's a better way to do this. There's a way. It does not make sense to take 6% of 94% that when I'm customer facing and this is pulling, like, why would I damage relationships with that? I could go directly to them instead. So you have the idea, the wheel spinning in your head, this idea germinating. You start your own company, PMC Logistics. How did that come about?
Well, I turned down the offer from Bank of Boston. I turned down the offer from Barry and Lloyd. And I said, I'm going to give it a try. And so I started at my dining room table and started looking up companies. And in those days, there were a lot of help wanted ads in the newspapers. And I would look at companies, try to find companies that I thought might have freight. I knew of other companies in the area because of my experience driving a truck in dispatch, in operations. And one of the companies I called was Boston Whaler. And the first time I went up to Boston Whaler, I drove into the parking lot, and in the receiving area, there were, I would say, 5 or 6 trucks lined up. So I went in and I talked to the finance people at Boston Whaler, and they said, yeah, this makes sense. Why don't we try it? And I went back out to the receiving dock and talked to the guy out there, and I said, what are all these carriers bringing in? And he said, well, we got a shipment from here, we got another shipment from there, and they had 5 shipments brought in on 5 different trucks that could have been brought in by 2 trucks. So he had 1 truck in the door he was unloading, 4 more waiting to get in. And what I said was, if we got purchasing to route a given way, I can negotiate a price with the carriers. You can decide which carriers you want to use. I'll finalize that price with them, and we'll set it up so that your vendors ship with these carriers. You'll have better productivity in the warehouse because they won't be stopping, and the carriers that you do use will be better off because they'll have more freight per stop, which is more shipments per stop is a key component of profitability for the carriers. And even the carriers who don't get the freight will be better off because their truck won't be sitting in the parking lot waiting to back in to deliver 1 shipment. They'll be out being productive. So it helped all the carriers. It was a great solution to a lot of problems. I mean, you had trucks idling in the receiving area, and nobody's making any money. I mean, it wasn't a good plan. So that was my first experience with a sales call. And that's how I got clients. I went through the newspaper, and Jordan's Furniture was the second client that I got, and that was in...
Were they as big back then?
Oh, well, not as big as they are now, but they were a lot more visible. They had even more ads on TV, if you can believe it. And Barry and Elliott were very well known. And
oh, yeah, they're an institution. They're a New England institution. If listeners aren't from New England, there's this place called Jordan's Furniture. They even have a thing called MOM, which is like Motion Odyssey Movie Ride. It's half furniture store, half cult of personality, and with a sprinkle of just finesse. It's a very interesting company.
Well, eventually they were purchased by Berkshire Hathaway, which is Warren Buffett's outfit. He only buys gems. Anyway, I went up to Jordan's Furniture and I sat with the finance guys up there and I said, here's what I think I can do for you. And I looked at their freight, and it was, they were doing the best they could with it, but there was an opportunity, and I ended up reducing the cost by like 20%. Beauty of it was they said, well, do we have to sign a contract? And I said, no, you don't have to sign a contract. Well, what's to prevent us from just getting you to do the new pricing and then throwing you out? I said, nothing at all. And that makes me incentivized to do a great job for you every month. You're going to pay me every month. I want to do a great job for you every month. I want to bring something to the table every month. And I said, all right, that sounds good. And they've been a client for 30 years now, over 30 years.
Wow. That's an amazing story in and of itself. That first client, though, so you start the business. How long did that take until you had some money coming in? And God bless your wife during that period, too, because that can be really tough.
Oh, it was. Happily, it was a short period of time. I started, I think, in like mid-February, and I got my first check on April 1st. So that's what I count as the birth of the business, April 1st, 1988.
And your menu of service, like right out the gate, you were doing carrier negotiation and route development, right?
Yes. Doing route guides for purchasing and for shipping. And by August, I had 5 clients, and I was making a living. And I was by myself for probably the first a little over a year. And then I hired a woman who worked at St. Johnsbury Trucking when I was there, who was really sharp. really sharp woman, Barbara Mahoney. And I said, I want you to come in and call a lot of companies and see if you can get me an appointment. So she came in and she said, she was there like an hour and a half, and she came in and said, well, I have an appointment for you with Brooks Brothers in New York, which was kind of bigger than I thought. So that was a kick. I went down there, and they needed us to tell them where their warehouse should be. So we did a pretty big study on it. And it sounds complicated, but it really isn't if you know what you're looking for. So we figured out where they should have a warehouse, and went down and told them, and sat in a meeting with the CEO and did the whole PowerPoint thing. And he said, this is really good stuff, the CEO said. This is really good stuff. This is really good stuff. He said, unfortunately, we discovered we own a building in Long Island City, so that's where our warehouse is going to be. But you did a great job, and we want to keep you on. So
they must have been some well-dressed executives, too, at Brooks Brothers.
They really were. It was great fun. That was a great client. Ellie Mason was another client. We had them for years until they were acquired by Thomas & Betts down in Tennessee. We also went to work for Boston Scientific when they were a relatively small company. And I called over there, and the CFO said, yeah, come over. This is something I've been thinking about. And he personally gave me a tour of their warehouse in Watertown. And it was, I don't even know, maybe 1,000th of the size it is today. But I got a kick out of being there at the beginning. We also worked for the Nature Company out in Berkeley, California, which was strange because I hadn't done any sales work out there. But one of the guys I worked with, the other company, was the traffic manager at the Nature Company out in Berkeley. And he said, I'd love to go with you. Would you think about traveling out of state? And I said, yeah, sure. Why not? And he said, yeah, we'll do it. And then I figured, well, I should develop other clients out here. So I called up the Sharper Image, which was a big cataloger at the time, and had stores everywhere in all the really upscale malls. And I went out there and I met with the VP of distribution, a guy who became a friend, Barry Jacobson. And he brought me in and brought his traffic department in. And his traffic department, I thought, well, they were going to kill me. They were very rough on me. And they left, and Barry said, well, I think that went pretty well. Let's start next week. But, I was lucky that I was able to walk out of the room.
Yeah. So you're an owner at PMC Logistics. You build this business, your first company. Everything's going great, but eventually you take one more huge risk. You start Aborn and Company where you're at now. How did that happen? How did that come about?
We hired a lot of good people at PMC. And one of the things that we discovered was that we couldn't find an outsourced company that did a good job on the freight bill audit and payment end of things. You need the data from the freight bill. And in order to get that, you have to do an audit. And in order to ensure that the pricing you negotiated is the pricing a client gets, you need to do an audit. But we couldn't find anyone to do it well. So we ended up taking it in-house. And as the business grew, the paperwork and the audit took over. And it wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to do consulting instead of having to worry about freight bills processed. And it just wasn't the business I wanted to be in. So I talked to the guys who I had working there, the folks that were working there, and I said, I don't want to do this anymore, but it's a good business if you like it. Do you like it? And they said, yeah. And I said, well, I'll sell it to you. So I sold the business to the folks at PMC Logistics. They became PMC Logistics Services, which was the best description of the essentially freight bill audit and processing business they were. And I kept a couple of clients, among them Jordan's Furniture, and I operated them as PMC Logistics, Inc. And it created some confusion, but it wasn't terrible because, people knew who we were. And in time, the PMC Logistics Services in Plymouth sold out to a company in North Carolina that was, in fact, a broker. So now I was worried that my PMC was going to be confused with the PMC that was now a brokerage. So I said, we've got to change the name because I don't want to be confused with them anymore. So we talked about what should the name be. And, you know, not to come off all Joe Modest or anything, but I didn't want it to be Aborn and Company because to me, the company is everybody else. You know, the people who do the work all the time, they're the company. It isn't, you know, my name is on the door, but that wasn't what I was after. I could have been by myself and been Aborn and Company, but I didn't enjoy being by myself. I enjoyed being part of a team and part of a group that was working toward the same end. So I didn't want to be singled out in any way. But Jill and Steve and an outside advisor that we had named Barry Culkin said, you're the one who started it, should be your legacy, which immediately sounded to me like they were talking about me being dead. So I said, well, all right, if that's what you think we ought to do. To me, it still sounds weird when they say, well, here at Aborn, and it just sounds weird.
It doesn't to me. I have to read it all the time, dude.
Yeah.
Due to this show, but I wanted to speak to that as someone who works for this company because I've worked for a lot of companies, both large and small. FedEx Trade Network's huge company.
Yeah.
Small independents. And I've worked in small companies. I've worked for an independent record label. So I've been around the business and in industries. But what I personally adore about working here is that we kind of have the best of both worlds in that we have high levels of experience, stability, and a proven track record, but you've also retained that startup vibe where we all feel like we're laying bricks and directly contributing to our overall growth as a company. It allows for nimble decision making, and because of that, we can be highly proactive and move with immediacy. And really, our internal and external fundamentals are married. Benchmarking. Due to the nature of the company, we're constantly looking for ways to improve, both internal and external, and avenues to adapt to changing and emerging market conditions. Has that been a conscious decision on your part to preserve that culture? You mentioned you left PMC because the company had changed. So was that something you really wanted to instill in here?
Yes. And again, the business had become a bill processing company, which didn't interest me. The benchmarking interested me. The where should our warehouses be analysis really interested me. The idea that we could help a company who was trying to decide, should I use vendor A in Chicago or vendor B in Los Angeles? What are the freight impacts? What are the cost impacts? We help with all those things, and we're very involved. To me, it feels like I don't feel like I'm working for Aborn and Company. I feel like I'm working for a bunch of different companies, and I enjoy sticking my beak into Prestige and then sticking my beak in on Jordan Furniture. And working for a number of companies really appeals to me. I've always enjoyed the starting up of a business because it's only fun when you don't know what's going to happen. If you get to a point in a business where you say, well, we've got enough revenue to cover everything and make a nice profit, that's no fun. Let's see what we can do. Let's grow it. Let's see if we can make it something different. Steve and Jill are just very ambitious. I only wish that I were 25 years younger now so I could be a part of this long term, because as much fun as I've had in this, I can see it being fun for a lot more years by changing the way we look at things. And, we brought in a TMS because a TMS is fundamental now to business. You have to be able to get in front of a shipment. People no longer want to hear any baloney about where their shipment is. They want the facts. They want to know precisely where it is. The old line of, it's on the way, that doesn't work anymore.
The team must hear that a lot because 2018 has been a particularly challenging year. A lot of ink has been spilled regarding the capacity crisis, record rates, service failures. In your 50 years of experience, how does this year compare to ones in the past?
Well, if you look at the past in, say, 1986, there were probably 5 times as many carriers as there are today. The diminishing number of particularly LTL carriers makes it that much more difficult to negotiate great pricing. Doesn't mean it can't be done. It just makes it more difficult. The other thing that we need to contend with is the capacity now is so tight that it's, again, tougher to negotiate pricing. One of the advantages we definitely bring to a client is we're very well known in carrier world. The carriers are all very familiar with us. And the hallmark for us is that we treat the carriers fairly. We're straight with them. The irony of this business is that unless I'm straight with the carriers, I can't do anything great for my clients. If I were to go out and say to the carriers, oh yeah, this guy has $1 million worth of freight and he'll give it to you, and the carrier ends up with $100,000 worth of freight, my name becomes mud in the carrier world. So we've always been very straight with the carriers. We have a good reputation with the carriers, which is an advantage to our clients. At the same time, in order to have a client to represent to the carriers, we have to do a great job for our clients, and we do. The other thing that I think differentiates us is we don't get any money from the carriers. We are paid 100% by our clients. That's it, period. We don't take money in a commission, or we also don't buy and sell freight, and that's a system where I'll buy a shipment on a truck, mark it up, and send the customer a bill, and then keep the markup and pay the carrier the lower amount. You know, we're as straight as we can be with everybody.
$700 billion industry, trucking transportation. Latest stats and figures headed for a $1.25 trillion industry within the next 10 years. That's a growth of nearly 6% per year. We're already dealing with a capacity crisis, elevated rates, driver shortage. Autonomous trucks have actually gone backward a little bit after some accidents. So we're kind of a long way away from a solution. What would you recommend to shippers who are struggling in this market right now?
I would say understand your freight characteristics, understand the value of that freight to a carrier. What do I mean by that? One of the things that you need to know is you have to understand lane balance in order to get a good price. If you have, for example, a ton of freight in Boston going to Chicago, you can get a great price. You've got a ton of freight going from Chicago to Boston, you're not going to get a great price. So those are the kind of things that a company like ours can help with. Understanding your freight, understanding the value of it to a carrier. One of the ways that we're different is we don't go to the carriers and ask, what'll you give us? We price the freight internally. We look at it and say, here's where it should be. And then we go to the carriers and say, this is what we want. It's wonderful when 3 carriers say, what, are you kidding me? That's ridiculous. And then 3 say, yeah, we'll do it. You know you're in the right. You know you've hit it right. If everyone said, yeah, we'll do it, that would be terrible. That would be a nightmare. If I asked 5 carriers for a price and they all agreed to it, I would know I didn't do a very good job at figuring out what the freight should run at. But the fact that some say yes and some say no tells me that we've got it in the right zip code. The key thing is understanding your freight, understanding how it fits into the carrier network, using the right carriers. I've seen people say they want to use YRC on a shipment from Boston to Chelsea. Well, that's the wrong carrier to use for that. They want to use Old Dominion for a 10,000-pound anchor, sea anchor. That's the wrong carrier. These are all critical things. Understanding how to make the work productive for the carrier will get the client a better price every time. And one of the things that I like to do is go out and look at the freight. Pick it up, heft it. See where it's going, how it's packaged. Is it palletized? How protected is it? Those are all things that we can do for our clients and tell them,
You bring up a great point. There's a school of thought out there that's kind of pervasive and bad, and it's that transportation is 10% cost and all we look at is rates. When really the totality of shipping and transportation is pretty substantial for a company. There's a lot of money tied up into it, way beyond rates, and things like accruals. So it sounds like what you're also trying to convey and educate the market on, your clients on, are a different way of thinking about their freight.
We definitely want them to be able to have a better picture of what their costs are and why they are that way. One of the ways that a TMS helps is with looking at optimization, so that you're not looking at a shipment as a standalone $1,200 shipment. You may be able to back it off with other freight that's in the vicinity and save a lot of money that way.
You've seen it all, right? Give us an anecdote. What's a great story in the industry?
It's not about outmuscling anyone when you're negotiating with carriers. We did a project for a company in Milwaukee, and at the time, there was a Roadway Express, and Roadway was known for hiring jocks and ex-Marines. So I was up in this company in Milwaukee, and two guys come in that looked like NFL players, and they were from Roadway. And I could tell right away they were geared up for a fight. They had been handling the freight for a long time, and it was very profitable for them because the price for the client stunk. So they made a bundle of money on it, and they were ready to fight for it. So we were sitting there, and I said, I feel terrible about this. And they didn't know what to say, and I said, you guys handle this freight for years, and you've done a great job, and now you're going to lose it. Why are we going to lose it, they said. I said, your pricing guy will never give you what we're asking for. And I turned the whole thing on its ear and had these guys arguing with me that they could get the price that I had asked for because they were going to go back and do battle with their own pricing manager. Yeah, it was like a jujitsu thing where I just...
Jedi mind trick.
Yeah, I just turned them around, made them go fight with their internal people to get the pricing I wanted. Because it wasn't just about, you have to be flexible. You have to be able to see what'll work. And you got to know something about the carriers. And knowing Roadway the way I knew them, they were always geared up to attack. And so I turned them around, had them attack their own people to get the pricing I needed for the client, and it worked. They reduced their price significantly, kept the business, everyone's happy.
I'm a big reader, so on a personal level, there's a factoid about you that I absolutely love. You're a published author and have been mentored by Boston's own Dennis Lehane. And if you're not familiar with the name, you're probably familiar with his works. Mystic River, Shutter Island, Gone Baby Gone, huge blockbuster books and blockbuster movies. One of your stories actually appears in Boston Noir, the collection that Lehane edited. It's the short titled Turn Speed North Quincy. That had to be exciting and really intimidating at the same time, too, because he was your mentor, right?
Yeah, when I first sold PMC to the people in Plymouth, I took some time off to write. I've always wanted to be a fiction writer. Or I should say, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a fiction writer. And I had to work for a long time. Sure. So I figured I'd give it a try, see what happens. I ended up bumping into Dennis Lehane at a writers' conference, and things just went from there, and he was very good with me. Gave me a lot of his time, a lot of his advice, and, helped me through, and then said, hey, there's a book we've got coming out, a collection we've got coming out. Would you like to give me something to put in it? And I said, well, I've never written a short story. He said, don't worry about it. You just try it, see what happens. And that's actually the first short story I've ever written. I usually write in long form, looking for a novel, that sort of thing. But that takes forever. And I may get back to it at some point. But I kind of put that aside again when I started gearing up again for growth here. But I hope to get back to it. I hope to live long enough to get back to it someday. But he's been terrific with me. In fact, one of the characters in The Given Day has my name, so that's always fun.
Oh, it does it?
Yeah.
And it sounds like, this side quest, you got published in the book. I think you got a lot out of it. So, I don't know. I think it's such a cool aside. But, we covered your past, and it has informed so much of the DNA and the fabric of this company. So let's talk about the future a little bit, because from the 70s to now, there have been major societal advances in technology. Actually, just yesterday, you were showing me a typewritten letter you'd received from 1988. It didn't arrive just now. I mean, you got it in 1988, but you were remarking about how silly it seems in hindsight, the length of time it would, like just written communication, something as universal as that would take. And now I'm thinking, wow, you had that customer in California. That must have been a lot tougher before the internet to keep those communication levels up. Supply chain, really across the board, has always been behind the curve in technology. What was it like adapting your business and your business models as technology changed throughout the decades?
In 1988, I tried to find technology that would let me essentially scan freight bills in and pull the data from them. And people acted like, what are you, crazy? Who can do that? Nobody can do that. I said, well, somebody should do it. And I only had to wait 28 years for it to... But...
You should have invented it.
Yeah. I needed it desperately. That would have saved all kinds of time. But anyway, now we have that. A vendor for one of our clients has the ability to put an order on electronically, transmit it to the carrier who transmits, and all the information is captured all the way along. And it's a beautiful thing. These TMSs that they have now I can't understand how they could be improved, but now they're talking about blockchain, which would, that's relatively new for me anyway. That'll probably help with the data capture. And the key to good pricing is data. That's what you need. And you have to know when, you have to know what, and you have to know how. And it's all in your data if you can capture it. And the TMS does that.
So fundamentally, the more technology improves, it doesn't disrupt us here at all. It actually enhances everything we can do because, as you mentioned, the power is in data. And way back when, you had to pull all of that off pieces of paper. And now we can get that fine data and with a ton of immediacy. And with the immediacy that people expect in this day and age. Now you send someone a text, if you don't get back to them, within 3 minutes, they start wondering what happened to you.
Yeah, absolutely. If you don't have a TMS, you're at a distinct competitive disadvantage. The data is the key to everything. I've said it repeatedly, but it bears repeating. As far as the outlook in the future, I think one of the big things that I see and worry about is the carriers going to dimensional pricing, where they take your shipment and put it on a scale, dimensionalize it with the newfangled machine, and they can tell the pounds per square foot instantly. That's going to change the way freight is priced. And you're really going to need to be on top of that, analyze that data, and find a better way to package the freight so that it doesn't give you extra cost for wasted space. Shippers sometimes will palletize a shipment that shouldn't be palletized. We're almost come full circle. When I started out, nothing was palletized. And that wasn't good. That slowed down the carrier's ability to strip the truck and reload the truck. Made it take longer, which they charge more for. Now too much freight is palletized. Someone will take a traffic cone and put it in the middle of a pallet and ship it. And everybody has a sticker on top of their pallet that says, do not stack on top of. And there are times when you should ship loose. And those are the kind of things that people probably wouldn't know on their own unless someone come in who understands how the carrier sees things and can advise you how to package your freight differently so you're not punished and paying for space you did not use.
ELDs, driver shortages, the capacity crisis, ransomware attacks, and a trade war. If you just look at all those words, and you just look at the headlines, I mean, we're talking about a pretty dystopian future, maybe even a dystopian present with just that stuff. Is it that bad? What is your outlook for the future?
The future will be more of the same, only different. The carriers will continue to evolve. One of the things that is definitely hurting the industry is the lack of drivers. Driving is a very difficult job. Not difficult in the sense that it takes, a 180 IQ to do it, but, you need to find people who are happy to be alone for long stretches of time and to be away from home. It's not easy. One of the things that excited me was the idea of the autonomous truck. And people, when they think autonomous truck, all they can think of is, a truck with no driver coming down their residential street and running over tricycles. But really, if that's set up correctly, it should be very, very easy to manage. What you do is you move it from off-ramp to off-ramp on the Mass Pike, for example, or Route 90 all the way to Seattle. So you put the autonomous truck on in Alston and you take it off in Seattle, and you have local drivers handling it. The toughest part of the freight business is the over-the-road driver. When you have an autonomous truck, it doesn't need to take time off. People in the freight business thought that 1980 and the Motor Carrier Act signaled the end of the world. And the end of the world has been predicted in the freight business every year since I've been in it, since 1968. Somebody always thinks everything's going to crash and burn, whether it would be the Teamsters, which pretty much has crashed and burned for them. But the Teamsters or the LTL carriers or the truckload carriers, intermodal was going to end the truckload business, and it didn't. There's always something coming along. The key to it is understanding when to move towards something new and when to wait until it's tested. And we've had a lot of experience with that over 30 years plus in the business. So I wouldn't worry about what the future holds. Thank God it comes one day at a time, so you don't have to worry about too much. And things may change and be different, but then it's still got to pick up a shipment here and take it there. You got to get it to the right place at the right time at the right cost. You do that, you'll be all set.
So there's plenty of hope on the horizon. It's all in the eye of the beholder and the perspective in which we look at things. Russ, thank you so much for your time today. And hey, here's to 50 more successful years. You want to do this for another 50?
No, thanks. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it. I hope some of what I said made sense.
This has been Consulting Logistics, presented by Aborn and Company. For this episode and all of our previous episodes, please visit abornandco.com/podcast or simply search Consulting Logistics on your favorite podcast player. Concerned about elevated supply chain costs in this tough transportation market? Want to get future-proof? Visit abornandco.com to set up a complimentary consultation with one of our freight managed solution experts and learn how we have successfully negotiated over $5 billion in client freight expenses. If you have any questions, comments, requests, and guest bookings, email me at tdooner@abornandco.com. That's TDOONER@abornandco.com. That's it until next week. I'm Tim Dooner for Russ Aborn and Consulting Logistics, saying take care and happy shipping.